My name's Mike Blangiforti, and I'm your host, and I'm the Vice President of Marketing and Public Relations for Caro Security. Welcome to part 2 of the series that we're running on the Gilgo Beach serial murders. If you missed part 1, it's archived, and you could watch it so that you could be brought up to speed to set up today, which is part 2. I'm happy to introduce my special guest and former Suffolk County Police Commissioner, Richard Dormer. Commissioner, welcome again.
Good morning, Mike. Good morning to your audience.
And just to recap where we left off in part 1 of this series, 3 years ago, a little more than 3 years ago, the history of Suffolk County changed forever. Serial murders gained notoriety, not just locally, but nationally, and in this particular case with Gilgo Beach, globally. So history changed in Suffolk County, and not for the better. We're talking about, a serial murder case. We're talking about multiple homicides. And where we left off at part 1 was is when you realized that we have a serial murder case on our hand, because you had the one body that was found on December 11th of 2010, and then 3 more are found on December 13th of 2010. And where we left off last time is that the bodies were similarly wrapped, as you said. And I just wanted to see, could we talk about at all the similarities of when the second, third, and fourth bodies were found on December 13th?
Well, all I can say, Mike, is that they were wrapped. I'm not going to indicate whether it was similar or not, okay, because that's an investigative, information that we do not want to divulge. There were 4 bodies lying on top of the ground. Mm-hmm. They weren't buried. They were dumped in the same area of Gilgo Beach. And so at that time, before we identified them, it looked like they were connected in some way. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's the theory at that point.
Yeah, and it's just for the folks that don't understand what dumped means in terms of police department lingo. Dumped, or a dump job, is when a murderer kills somebody somewhere else and then brings the body or bodies to a different location to dump them. And that was the case here.
Examining the crime scene, it was pretty obvious that they weren't murdered at Gilgo Beach. Mm-hmm. They were disposed of at Jones Beach, or at Gilgo Beach. So, we call that a dump job. Mm-hmm. In police parlance. And
what was the proximity of the second, third, and fourth bodies in relation to each other? I know that you said they were in close proximity. How close?
Well, some of them 4/10 of a mile from the other remains, 1/4 of a mile, 1/2 a mile, less. They were all pretty much lined up on the north side of Ocean Parkway in the Gilgo Beach area. So they were close enough that they were connected. You could determine that they were all connected because of the commonalities of, the way the bodies were disposed of, the type of victim. And so we moved to the next stage, which is the identification of these victims, which took some weeks.
And that's always challenging. And
yes.
Let's talk about, why does it take so long to identify people? I mean, you and I both know based on our experience, but can you explain to the folks, why does it take so long to identify the victim of a homicide, or anything for that matter?
Well, and your audience will probably see the issues here. CSI on television, an hour show. They identified the victims very quickly. DNA is analyzed very quickly. In real life, it doesn't happen like that. The medical examiner has to take the remains. They do the forensics with the remains. They extract tissue and, for DNA analysis. Mm-hmm. It takes time. It's not something that happens overnight. A lot of people don't understand that. Investigators that or listening to this or watching this program will understand. They're probably nodding their heads and saying, yeah, I had the same problem. So it doesn't matter what kind of case you have, it's going to take some time. And even though there was a rush put on this with the medical examiner, and we were partnered, Suffolk County was partnered with New York City Medical Examiner's Office, which did a tremendous job, by the way. And so through DNA analysis, which they now have to upload into the FBI Missing Persons database, where it's now matched against DNA of missing persons. And that's how we identified these 4 victims.
Right. Now, we know that the inception of the case was a missing persons case, Shannon Gilbert. So when the first body was found on December 11th, at that point of the investigation, I'm sure all the Suffolk County investigators are saying, oh, okay, we think we found Shannon Gilbert. But what we did bring up last week in last week's segment was that there was a distinct feature about Shannon Gilbert, and that she had a titanium jaw. So when the other victims are found and all 4 bodies go to the medical examiner's office, you're realizing for the first time that, okay, we didn't find Shannon Gilbert either, right?
Well, the ME reported very quickly through examining the remains that there was no titanium jaw in any of the victims. That eliminated Shannon Gilbert. We didn't even have to analyze the DNA, because we had the full remains of these 4 victims. So now, as you mentioned, Mike, and I think, again, the audience would understand why we were thinking when the first body was found that this was Shannon Gilbert. When the chief of detectives called me on that Saturday, the 11th, December 11th, 2010, we were assuming it was Shannon Gilbert, because she had been missing from May of the same year. And then, of course, we determined it wasn't Shannon. And then 3 more bodies were found 2 days later. So now...
What goes through a police commissioner's head? I mean, I was a detective squad commander, but I never really sat at the top of the top cop. And you were the top cop for the Suffolk County Police Department. And yeah, we talk professionally, you know, in terms of what the focus is and everything. What goes through a police commissioner's head when you realize that you have something really significant on your hands now? You're not dealing with one single homicide victim. On December 13th of 2010, you get the call from Chief Verone that you have 3 more victims. What goes through a police commissioner's head when you see that you have something this massive?
Well, we knew it was huge. This was a big criminal investigation. And I knew that this was going to garner all sorts of publicity, which is something that you have to deal with as a police commissioner. And also I should mention that, you know, throughout your career, with your training, experience, and background, and many years in the police business, you know, you're really prepared to handle something like this. You have to be prepared to handle an investigation like this. So I felt very competent and confident that we could bring this thing to a conclusion because of the expertise and the types of people we have in the Suffolk County Police Department. So that's how I'm thinking, that you know, we have the assets available for a major investigation. We're a major police department, 2nd largest county police department in the United States, and outstanding investigators. So I was, you know, comfortable with taking on this investigation.
Okay. Now, again, we're talking about that you realize that you have a serial murder case on your hand, and I spoke about, you know, well, what goes through a police commissioner's head. Was it going through your head on that day when you're now up to 4 bodies? I think there's going to be more. Was that in your head immediately? Or?
Yes, of course. You know, I was thinking like that, and when I discussed it with the staff, you know, we brainstormed this type of investigation. We had the homicide people in, and it was pretty clear to everybody that this looked like a serial killer, unless something else came up that would disprove that. But that was the theory from very early on in the investigation. There were too many common denominators. And then when the identification came, that sort of confirmed what our view was.
When you realized it was a serial case, were you contacted by outside agencies like the FBI, the state police, or did Suffolk County Police Department reach out to them?
No, we reached out to the FBI immediately after we found the 4 bodies. They have an analysis unit or a behavioral science unit, that's the old name, and we sat down with them very quickly. They came up to Hauppauge, up to Suffolk County, and we sat down with them with our task force, with the commanders. I sat in on the meeting, and we made available all the information we had at that time. Right. We stayed in constant contact with the FBI, the Behavioral Analysis Unit in Quantico. We reached out to NYPD, Nassau County PD, the state police, Parks Police, and police departments from outside New York State that may have had a similar type of crime scene and crime victims. So it was very important that we look at this globally, and that's what we did.
Yeah, now the FBI, when they got involved, on December 15th of 2010, it was reported that a white SUV was seized by the police. What was this white SUV, and what connection did it have to the investigation?
Well, the focus, we went back and interviewed, the detectives went back and interviewed Joe Brewer, who was the John for Shannon Gilbert. That was initially started this whole case.
Right, so if we're reminding the folks that the inception of the investigation was a missing persons case, that of Shannon Gilbert, who police investigators knew was a prostitute, knew because of the investigation that she had a John in Long Island. He was identified as
Mr. Brewer. Yeah.
Brewer.
Yeah.
And we knew that she saw him. And so that's, is that where the white SUV comes in?
She traveled out from Manhattan to Oak Beach to meet Mr. Brewer. And after the encounter, at some point during the encounter, she ran out of his home and disappeared. That was May 1st of 2010. The Suffolk County Police Department picked up the missing persons investigation. And over the months leading up to December, the detectives would respond to Oak Beach with canine and do searches, continue to search for her remains, because we believed that she was deceased. She was, prior to her disappearance, she was always in contact with her family. That all stopped that morning, the early morning of May 1st. And the canine officer crossed over Ocean Parkway and wanted to give the dog some work and headed west near Gilgo Beach, and that's when he found the first body. So in December, when we found the remains of the four females, the detectives went back and talked to Mr. Brewer.
Now, when was the first time they talked to Brewer?
When the missing, very early in May, when the missing person case was being investigated. He was thoroughly vetted at that time. The driver that drove Shannon out to Long Island was interviewed on a number of occasions. Both of them took a polygraph test. There was other follow-up investigative things that we did.
Did they pass the polygraph?
Yeah, there was nothing to show that they were being untruthful. So we were satisfied that they didn't have anything to do with Shannon's disappearance. But now that we ended up with 4 bodies found months later near the same vicinity, it was appropriate that the investigators go back and interview the principals involved, which would be Mr. Brewer. He voluntarily gave up his vehicle to be checked. He allowed the detectives to check his home and his backyard. He did that. He was very cooperative, by the way, and you know, agreed to the searches and the vehicle. We wanted to eliminate all aspects of this, or investigate all aspects of this. I mean, I
know everybody at home, sometimes both trained professionals and untrained people would want to know, well, how do you, seems like that would be the prime suspect. And I'm sure this has come up time and time again, but it would seem that, okay, he lives in the vicinity. He was seeing, we know he saw at least one prostitute, and then bodies are found. Would seem like, I think we have a pretty good suspect right here.
Well, that's why we vetted him again very thoroughly, and we were very satisfied that the Shannon Gilbert disappearance was different from the disappearance of the four people, the four victims at Gilgo Beach. There were many indicators that they were different. These, when they were identified, the four young ladies, which by the way are on the board here.
We should talk a little bit about
they're on
this.
The board here,
because,
but if I may, just for your audience, Mike, the MO of the killer of these four young women was completely different from the MO of, we'll say, Joe Brewer, who was soliciting the prostitute. The driver drove her out there and waited for Shannon to come out of the home so that he could drive her back to Manhattan, but she ran away and got lost. And the terrain around there is tremendous. Yeah. It's really, really horrible, swampy, wet, cold.
So Brewer saw, he saw Shannon Gilbert. Was it determined, and if he saw one prostitute, is it a reasonable assumption to say that he saw other prostitutes?
Yeah, that's a good assumption, but again, the MO, how he contacted the prostitute, completely different from the way these young ladies were contacted by the killer.
Were there other prostitutes with Brewer that came to light during the course of the investigation?
Well, I'd rather not comment on that, Mike, but we know that Shannon Gilbert, who was a prostitute, came to Brewer's home that night of May 1st, 2010. I don't want to go into that background, but I should very clearly tell everybody that Joe Brewer was vetted very carefully and thoroughly, and we believe 100% he wasn't involved in the killing or the murders of these four young ladies.
But without getting into specifics regarding Brewer, is it a reasonable assumption to make, without getting into specifics, that he saw other prostitutes?
Yeah, you could assume that, but I'm not going to confirm that.
Understood. But the other thing that I want to bring to everybody's attention is that we talk about bodies, and we talk about that, okay, a body was found, and then another 3 bodies were found. And it seems like such, and it's a term that we use, but what people may not realize watching in a police investigation and a homicide, that there's faces behind these bodies, and there's families behind the faces. And we really have to talk about these are 4 young women, and that in the police department, we don't differentiate between what somebody chooses to do as a profession. It doesn't matter. If somebody's killed, we investigate it. Because that's what we do. And here you have,
if I may, Mike, they were victims. Nobody deserves to have their life snuffed out. No one. That's murder. And police departments everywhere take murder very seriously. It doesn't matter the occupation of the victim or what the incident was. If you were murdered, we're obligated to represent that person, the police department. And so, and this picture, by the way, with the 4 pictures of these 4 young women, I kept in my office so that it was a reminder to me every day as a police commissioner why we were pursuing this serial killer, why we wanted to bring this person to justice. They look like your next door neighbor. They look like nice young ladies. Again, I'm not passing any judgment on their occupation. I don't do that. And I don't think police do that. What police officer or detective or police commissioner would not like to bring in a serial killer during their career? I mean, if you think about that and somebody says they're not taking it seriously because they're prostitutes, they're 100% wrong, because again, the real people, real families, and we dealt with the families almost on a daily basis. Our detectives went up to their homes, sat with their families, filled them in as best they could on the investigation. Could not give them all the details, as you can understand, and I think your audience understands that.
Sure.
We have to keep certain things close to the vest to move the investigation forward. And it's very important if somebody down the road shows up at a police precinct and confesses to the murders.
Sure.
I'm the serial killer. How do you know that's the serial killer? You have to have information that only the detectives know and the serial killer knows.
I'm talking about
that's
information.
That's how you vet that person.
I'm talking about information. Now, the medical examiner gets the victims, and we were talking about commonalities before, about proximity, about how the bodies were wrapped. Cause of death. I believe the cause of death with these victims was identical. And what was the cause of death?
Well, it was determined by the medical examiner that asphyxiation was the cause of death. So, you know, that covers a big area. You know, a lot of people,
Sure.
when they think asphyxiation, they think of one particular action. It may be more than that, but I'm not going to go into that specifics. That's public. The medical examiner announced that the manner and cause of death is asphyxiation.
But asphyxiation, there's so many methods to cause asphyxiation.
Yes.
And each of them different. You know, somebody could smother somebody with a pillow, and that's a cause of asphyxiation. Another thing that I know from my experience as a detective squad commander is to look for ligature marks. So can you talk if there were ligature marks on the body?
No, Mike, I think you can understand, and your audience will understand, that we don't talk about these details. That's part of the investigative case and the file.
Because ligature marks just means, you know, for those that don't know, ligature marks means marks on a body, on the neck, could be on the wrists, could be on the ankles, indicating that somebody was tied up. If somebody's asphyxiated with a rope or a scarf or something that goes around the neck, it creates a ligature mark, but we can't talk about if...
No, I'm not going to get into that detail, but I should mention that two of the victims disappeared in 2010. So they were recent homicide victims. So their remains were not degraded that much. So the medical examiner had something to work with from an evidence point of view. So again, I don't want to go into what evidence was recovered from these.
But the other thing that we look for, and okay, I understand that, you know, maybe we can't talk about if there were ligature marks or not on the bodies, and you know, and that's part of the investigation. It's in the investigation. The other thing I know we look for in asphyxiation cases is something called petechial hemorrhaging. Were the remains, were the bodies in a state that the medical examiner was able to determine if there was petechial hemorrhaging in the eye? Petechial hemorrhaging is little pinpoint red dots that appear in the eyeballs that's consistent with an asphyxiation. Was that determined?
Again, I'm not going to comment on that, Mike.
Okay.
That's part of the investigation. That's information that we keep close to the vest, as I've said before. Reporters have asked me that question many times, and you know, I don't answer every question that they ask, including this one, Mike. So
I understand.
I know you understand that
of course I do.
A detective squad commander. So, but you have to ask the question. I understand that.
Okay, but now I just want to get into, you know, and I know you brought this this board that shows the victims' faces, their names, when they went missing, and when they were discovered. Now, Melissa Bartholomew was the first to be discovered. This was the first call that you got from Chief Verone, that Chief Dominic Verone was the chief of detectives at the time that Commissioner at the Gilgo Beach murder cases became public information. So Melissa was the one who was found on December 11th.
Yeah, she was the first one. And by the way, she went missing from the Bronx in 2009. Maureen Baynard Barnes went missing from Manhattan in July of 2007. So we have 2007, 2009. Then we moved to June of, this is Megan Waterman, June of 2010. This was a few months before she was found. And then we have Amber Lynn Costello was missing from Babylon. By the way, I should back up. Megan was missing from Hauppauge, Long Island. Amber Lynn Costello from Lindenhurst. And she went missing in September of 2010. So these are recent cases, 2007, 2009, and then 2 in 2010. And then, of course, subsequently we got more information that would, the timeline now went further back.
Right.
Which I'm sure we'll get into at a future.
Oh, absolutely. But just talking about the 4, what I am noticing, in just looking at the chart, is that that Maureen and Melissa go missing in 2007, and then almost exactly 2 years later, 2009, which is a pretty wide berth, and they're both from the city. And then we look at Megan and we look at Amber Lynn, and we see that they both went missing in 2010, in June and in September. Was it ever looked at by detectives that, could the killer have been moved from the city to Long Island? Well,
you mentioned the times that they went missing, the dates, and that was looked at. We looked at where they went missing from, and obviously this guy is comfortable with New York City and Long Island. That you can see from the investigation, and there were other investigative leads that we had that would indicate that. We looked at the type of victim. Of course, obviously there were prostitutes on Craigslist. That was a common denominator. Their body type, most of them are petite, they're petite females.
So Craigslist, prostitution.
Yes.
Okay. City, Long Island. So the commonalities.
Age is under 30. They're young, petite females. Again, the detectives we looked at, that's obviously the MO of this person. Does he target particular types? It appears so.
Right.
Where they were dumped is obviously a common denominator.
Well, yeah,
They're all dumped in the same location.
So the commonalities, the bodies are dumped at Gilgo. We talked about body wrapping, which you didn't want to get into great detail. Prostitutes, Craigslist. So there's at least 4 commonalities.
And they were murdered at a different location and dumped at Gilgo.
Yeah, asphyxiation.
Yes.
So we have 5 commonalities now. But going back to my original question, and I'm not trying to play detective, I'm retired from that work. 2007, 2009, missing from the city. 2010, missing from Long Island. Can we draw a conclusion that could the killer have lived in the city and then moved to Long Island? I don't know.
Well, he could live in Long Island and work in the city.
Okay.
It could be, but we feel, and the FBI analysis unit feels that he was comfortable with the area of Gilgo Beach.
Got it.
With Long Island. But then again, further investigation, which we'll get into at another interview, would indicate he's very familiar with Long Island,
and just
other than Gilgo Beach.
And just to set up, the next I want to conclude, today, part 2. Last question I'm going to ask you to conclude today is, in January, you made a determination that the search was going to stop till the spring. Was that a difficult decision? Was it a collaborative decision?
Yeah, no, we knew we'd have to go back out there and check that area thoroughly to make sure there were no more remains out there. Huge area. We hadn't covered all of it as of this point, but the winter was set in, and so the ground was very difficult to traverse, ice and snow.
Yep.
And so we decided to go back in the spring before
Okay.
foliage would start to sprout.
Got it.
And that's what we did. We made the
All right.
decision to do that.
And
I should mention, Mike, and for your audience too, we're in the recovery of remains.
Oh, I understand.
We're-
And I'm
we're
going
looking-
to
we're
stop.
looking for
I'm
bodies.
going to stop you here because I think we're leaving off at a really good part now. The search commissioner calls off the search in January to pick up in the spring because of the weather conditions and the terrain. So we're going to conclude part 2 today of the Gilgo Beach series. I want to thank you, Commissioner Dormer, for coming on again, and we'll pick it up with part 3 in this very interesting and informative series. I'm Mike Blangiforti. Remember, get Arrow, get secure.